My dearest Cecilia, how can any of the great friendships in history ever compare to ours? Did any ever go over half of London on a broiling day so that their friend could be comfortably housed? Let me begin at the beginning. After looking at every undesirable residence in London, I arrived at 32 Spectre Street, Mayfair. Failure number 253, I said, as I toiled up the steps with my soul athirst for afternoon tea. So much for my spirit of prophecy. Once inside, I thought I had arrived at a small compartment of heaven by mistake. It was fresh as a daisy, and clean as a cherry, and bright as a cherub's face. It is all of these, and 100 more. Apropos, I asked, in fear and trembling, what the rent might be. £300 a year! Oh, God, a feather would have knocked me down. With that suspiciousness which is so characteristic of you, you will immediately begin to hint that there must be some terrible, unaccountable smell, some odious, inexplicable noise haunting the rooms. Nothing of the kind. So lay aside any skepticism and give unfeigned thanks for a palace at the cost of a hovel, sent to you by an invaluable friend as yours, Elizabeth. P.S. I am so sorry that I will not be there to witness your first raptures, but poor Artie is looking so pale and thin after the whooping cough that I'm sending him at once to the sea, and since I can't bear to have the child out of my sight, I'm going into banishment likewise.
Dearest Elizabeth, why did little Archie not delay his whooping cough until August? It is very odd, the perverse way that children always fix upon the most inconvenient time for their diseases. Here we are, installed in paradise. Most things in this world are disappointing, but this house is not. The mystery of the rent remains a mystery. My sister Adela comes next week. I am so glad. It is dull driving by oneself of an afternoon, and I always think that a woman alone in a carriage, even with a little dog beside her, does not look good. Ooh, the bell. Peace is a word that may well be expunged from one's London dictionary. Yours affectionately, Cecilia.
Dearest Cecilia, you will perceive that I'm devoting only one small sheet of notepaper to you. I've actually been reduced to writing quite large to fill even this. I suffer from seaside lethargy. My life with Archie is spent building sandcastles and watching the tide obliterate them. God, there are glaring white houses and glaring white roads and glaring white cliffs. Oh, if anyone knew how unpatriotically I detest the chalk cliffs of Dover. Oh, how I wish I could crawl into this envelope and whirl off to dear, beautiful, filthy London. Your disconsolate, Elizabeth.
Oh, my dearest Elizabeth, how I wish we were out of this dreadful, dreadful house. About 10 days ago, the housemaid came to me with a very long face and said, "If you please, Mum, did you know that this house is haunted?" She told me that the cook had been to order groceries, and the man said with a very peculiar smile, "Number 32, eh? I wonder how long you'll stand it. Last lot held out just a fortnight." She could only extract from him that the house had such a villainously bad name that the owners were able to let it go for a mere song. You know how firmly I believe in apparitions. The mere thought of being brought face to face with the bodiless dead makes my brain unsteady. The moment Henry came home, I ran to him and told him the whole story. But he pooh-poohed the whole thing, laughed at me, and asked whether we should turn out of the prettiest house in London at the height of the season because a grocer said it had a bad name. Well, Adela was set to come yesterday. And in the morning, our weekly hamper of flowers, fruits and vegetables arrived from the country. I always dress the flowers myself. Servants can be so tasteless. And it occurred to me, you know my sister's passion for flowers, to carry up an arrangement as a pleasant surprise in her room. I had seen the housemaid go in the moment before, but as I turned the handle, suddenly a sort of shiver passed over me, and I looked up. The maid was standing by the bed with a look of unutterable horror on her face. Her lips moved a little, and in a hoarse whisper she said, "Oh my God, I have seen it." And then suddenly collapsed on the floor. Hearing the noise, our butler, Phillips, came running in. We tried to bring her around with smelling salts, and all the while we kept glancing over our shoulders in a vague, cold terror of seeing some awful, shapeless apparition. At the end of 2 hours, we succeeded in reviving her, only to discover that she had gone stark raving mad. She became so violent that it required all the combined strength of Henry and Phillips to hold her. Of course, we sent for the doctor, who removed her to hospital. We are utterly in the dark, her ravings being far too disconnected and unintelligible. I feel so shattered that no earthly consideration would induce me to allow Adela to occupy that terrible room. I shudder whenever I pass the door. Yours, in great agitation, Cecilia.
Dearest Cecilia, how very dreadful, but I am still unconvinced as to whether the house is at fault. I mean, you know I feel sort of godmother to it and responsible for its good behaviour. Don't you think that the maid may have just had a fit? I myself have a cousin who is subject to seizures of the kind. Or are you sure she is not prone to fits of madness? Ascertain as to whether or not there is insanity in her family. It is so common nowadays and simply on the increase. You know my utter disbelief in ghosts, so I implore you to not give way to panic, which may possibly and probably prove utterly groundless. Oh, how I wish I were there with you, to make you listen to reason. Had I the wings of a dove. Write immediately, please.
Dearest Elizabeth, you will see that we have left that terrible, fateful house. Oh, how I wish we could have escaped sooner. My dear Elizabeth, I shall never be the same woman again, even if I live to be 100. Let me try to be coherent, as I tell you connectedly what has happened. First, as to the housemaid. She has been removed to an asylum where she remains in much the same state. 3 days ago, Ralph Gordon called. He's been calling regularly these last 10 days, and Adela has always blushed and smiled, poor little cat, whenever he's made his appearance. He looked very handsome in his uniform, but was as sceptical as ever about the ghostly origin of the maid's seizures. Let me come here and sleep in that room. I'll exorcise every demon that shows his ugly nose, even if I should find 7 white ghostesses sitting on 7 white postesses. He was so eager and so confident that I yielded at last. About 10 o'clock he arrived, accompanied by a friend and fellow officer, Captain Burton, who was anxious to see the result of the experiment. "Let me go at once," Ralph said, looking very happy and animated. "A new sensation is a luxury not to be had every day of one's life. Goodbye, Miss Adela," he said, taking her hand with a look half laughing, half sentimental. "Fare thee well. And if forever, then forever fare thee well. This is my last dying speech and confession. Now, mind," he went on, addressing us all, "if I ring the bell once, don't come. I may be flurried and lay hold of the bell without thinking. If I ring twice, come." And off he went, jumping up the stairs 3 at a time and humming a tune. As for the rest of us, we sat in different attitudes of expectation and listening. First we tried to talk a little, but it would not do. The clocks ticking sounded as loud as a great church bell close to one's ears. Then, just after 11... "Let us go," said Adela, running to the door. "No," said Captain Burton. "Remember, he told us distinctly if he rang once not to come. Nothing would annoy Ralph more than having his directions disregarded." 10 minutes more of suspense. 10 minutes on the clock, but 1,000 centuries in our hearts. Then, again. We rushed to the door. I don't think we were 1 second flying upstairs. Adela was first in the room. There he was, standing in the middle of the floor, rigid, petrified, that same look that is burned into my heart in letters of fire. An awful, unspeakable fear on his brave young face. For an instant, he stood thus. Then, stretching out his arms, he groaned in a terrible, husky voice, "Oh my God, I have seen it. And he fell down dead. Yes, dead. Not a swoon, not a fit, but dead. Vainly, we tried to bring back the life to that strong young heart, but it will never come back. I cannot see the page for the tears that are blinding me. Such a demonic, infected house. I can no longer write. You're broken-hearted, Cecilia.
This is a true story.